Are the meeting platform hosts ready to begin? So sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, are you ready to begin the hearing?
I am.
Please provide a 5-second countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, or good afternoon. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. The committee procedures for remote hearings remain the same. If you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the procedures for today's hearing? Hearing none, we will proceed. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, we are gathered for our final full committee event of the 117th Congress to discuss a discussion draft of the VA Housing Loan Forever Act of 2022. This pivotal legislation proposes a new approach to closing the racial homeownership gap by expanding eligibility for the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program. This is a complex issue, and I hope today's hearing can serve as the beginning of the conversation on how this committee can move forward to address unjust racial disparities and how minority veterans have historically accessed VA benefits. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, or as we know it today, the GI Bill, gave many Americans an opportunity to own a home for the very first time. However, too often, veterans of color, especially black veterans, were left out. It is a fact that in the post-World War II era, many African American veterans were barred from using their earned GI Bill benefits due to discriminatory housing practices such as redlining and unjust agency actions. Local VA centers that were loyal to Jim Crow laws systematically denied non-white veterans access to GI Bill benefits. Even when a veteran could get past the VA, they had to deal with banks, which denied loan applications for non-white veterans, or non-white neighborhoods, due to the Federal Housing Administration's redlining policy. Now, this discrimination continued until the enactment of the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, which marked the end of federal support for racially restrictive housing policies. However, recent coverage by the Washington Post further suggests that VA continues to deny benefits to black veterans at a higher rate than white veterans. The diligent work of our witnesses today, notably of the Black Veterans Project and the Center for Responsible Lending, has helped unearth the ugly reality of patterned systemic racism that led to the denial of VA benefits for veterans of color for decades. A veteran's eligibility for benefits is directly tied to their character of discharge. When a veteran receives an unwarranted discharge status, their access to their unearned benefits is cut off. A nationwide study conducted in 2022 found that of the more than 1 million military discharges examined, found that black veterans were more likely to receive a less than honorable discharge upon separation. These discriminatory policies and practices have had generational impact and can be seen as a large contributor to the racial wealth gap in the United States. Today, we are discussing a draft bill that would honor the GI Bill's promise of economic stimulation for all veterans. Under this legislative proposal, the previously unused home loan benefit for any veteran could be transferred without limitation to the veteran's surviving spouse, children, grandchildren, or other direct descendants. Not only does this discussion draft provide a path to address past wrongs and access to the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program, it looks forward and answers the call of VSOs to make an unused benefit transferable to descendants of veterans into the future. It has long been an ask of the VSO community to align the VA home loan guarantee with VA education assistance benefits in terms of transferability to ensure veteran families can prosper. From both the lender and the borrower's procedural perspective, the VA loan process under the benefit transfer proposal would remain unchanged. Specifically, under the discussion draft, the VA loan process would still be initiated by the descendant borrower securing a certificate of eligibility from VA. The only change that would occur is in VA's criteria for issuing the certificate, that it be based on the benefit being transferred from the veteran to a descendant. Now, this proposal has precedent in the education benefit transfer procedures established in the post-9/11 Veterans Educational Assistance Act of 2008. These same processing procedures, which VA indicates take approximately 30 days, could be adapted to fit the home loan benefit transfer process. An earned benefit for heroic service and sacrifice should be available for descendants to use as the veteran wishes. This legislation is long overdue in addressing inequitable access to VA benefits, and it offers us an opportunity to break an all too familiar cycle regarding veteran benefits, that we appropriately recognize the sacrifice veterans have made for our country and not make them wait for what they've earned. Blue Water Navy Vietnam veterans waited decades for legislation recognizing their toxic exposure to Agent Orange. LGBTQ veterans, too, have lost out on opportunities while in service and benefits after separation because of their individual identity. Toxic exposed veterans of more recent conflicts waited 20 years until the passage of my PACT Act for the health care and benefits they've earned. Now, this is why I have introduced legislation to examine the impacts of discriminatory policies on LGBTQ veterans, and it is why I've worked with Senator Warnock to study racial disparities regarding VA disability and other benefits based on demographic characteristics. With the passage of the PACT Act and the legislation I've introduced, I believe we're helping to change the course to ensure all veterans are equitably recognized for their service and sacrifice. It's never too late to do the right thing. Giving veterans and their families what they've earned is the right thing. There are many questions and ideas for how we can improve this legislation, and I hope we can discuss today. And so I appreciate everyone being here to participate in this conversation. And Ranking Member Bost, you are recognized for any opening remarks that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon. You know, we're here today to discuss the VA Housing Loan Forgiveness Act, Forever Act. Since the inception of the home loan benefit after World War II, millions of veterans have been able to use this benefit to purchase their part of the American dream. This program has grown from serving a little over 430,000 loans in 2014 to over 1.4 million loans in fiscal year 2021. The bill before us today would greatly expand this earned benefit to the spouses, children, and grandchildren of deceased veterans, and provide living veterans the opportunity to transfer benefits to eligible family members. Now, I understand that the goal of this proposal is an attempt to address the housing discrimination that occurred following World War II. This is a worthy goal, but I question if this bill is the correct way to address it. I am skeptical if the VA can implement the provisions of this bill. The records of thousands of veterans before 1970 simply don't exist after the fire in St. Louis. And many of those that do exist are basically inaccessible. Now, how will the VA and the claimants know if their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents used the VA home loan almost 80 years ago? In many cases, a beneficiary grandparent or great-grandparent has probably already passed on. If the VA workforce is the VA workforce prepared to handle hundreds of thousands of new loans that would need to be processed if the bill is enacted? How would this bill impact veterans who are currently eligible for the benefit? These veterans already face delays in some areas due to shortages of qualified appraisers. On average, it also takes longer for a VA loan to be processed compared to a non-VA market loan. I also question if providing a very popular earned veteran benefit to those who have not served could impact recruiting and retention issues that plague our military today. That being said, I'm looking forward to the hearing from our witnesses what they think about this proposal, and I'm also interested to hear from the VA witnesses if the bill can be implemented without impacting benefits of current veterans. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bosk. I'll now recognize our first witness. We have our witness on. So I will now recognize our first panel, Representative Jim Clyburn from the great state of South Carolina. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Takata, Ranking Member Boost, and fellow colleagues of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, thank you very much for an opportunity to provide testimony on the VA Housing Loan Forever Act of 2022. It is a pleasure to be back with one of the committees where I began my congressional tenure. Alex de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America, penned that the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her fault. Colleagues, the VA Housing Loan Forever Act of 2022 attempts to repair a fault made by our country in its treatment of African American veterans following the end of World War II. When Congressman Seth Moulton and I introduced the Sergeant Isaac Wood Jr. and Sergeant Joseph H. Maddox GI Bill Restoration Act, we did so to right a wrong visited upon black veterans of World War II. In 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or the GI Bill, into law. This landmark legislation represented a promise to all of those who fought for our country that their sacrifices will be rewarded with loans with a range of benefits, including guaranteeing low-cost mortgages and low-interest loans to start a business or farm, unemployment compensation, and education assistance. Sadly, in practice, African Americans were not included in that all. While the original GI Bill ushered in decades of prosperity for post-war America, this prosperity was not equally enjoyed by black veterans who were denied access to the law's benefits by mostly white state and local Veterans Administrations. Veterans Administrations adopted the Federal Housing Administration's well-documented, racially exclusive housing programs when it began to insure mortgages for returning veterans. Big developments like Leonardtown and Daly City, built after World War II, were financed in part by the Veterans Administration with the same racial restrictions the FHA had. It has been reported that 67,000 mortgages insured by the VA in the New York and Northern Virginia suburbs that year, fewer than 100 went to non-whites. Further, in Mississippi, only 2 of the more than 3,200 VA guaranteed home loans issued in 1947 went to black borrowers. Black veterans also lacked full access to the GI Bill's education assistance programs. 19% of white World War II veterans earned a college degree as a result of the GI Bill, compared to only 6% of black veterans. Intentional discrimination policies at the federal, state, and local levels, along with political and institutional barriers, created significant inequities in access to GI Bill benefits. These policies prevented black veterans from achieving the full economic mobility potential provided by these comprehensive federal benefits and affected the accumulation of wealth by black families over generations. In the United States, home ownership is the primary tool for wealth accumulation, and while the home ownership gap between blacks and whites has always been stark, it appears the disparity has grown with time. According to a report from the Consumer Federation of America, home ownership between whites and blacks stand at 74.5% and 44.10% respectively as of 2020. This contrasts with home ownership rates in 1960 between whites and blacks was 65% and 38% respectively. This home ownership disparity helps explain the difference in net worth for white families, which stands at $171,000 compared to that of black families, only $17,150. I'd like to share with you some background on the same namesake of legislation Congressman Moulton and I introduced. Sergeant Isaac Woodard was traveling home by bus to Winsboro, South Carolina, still wearing his uniform after being honorably discharged when a small-town police chief forcefully removed him from the bus and blinded him with his nightstick. The police chief was acquitted of the crime by an all-white jury. But Sergeant Woodard's horrific abuse prompted President Truman to sign an executive order integrating the armed services. Sergeant Joseph Maddox, after being injured during his service and medically discharged, Sergeant Joseph Maddox, a World War II era veteran, applied and was accepted to Harvard University for a master's degree program. He sought VA assistance from his local office to help with the tuition and was denied payment to, and I quote, avoid setting a precedent, end of quote. After seeking assistance from the NAACP, the VA in Washington, D.C. ultimately promised to get Sergeant Maddox the educational benefits he deserves. colleagues, we must repair the fault against Sergeant Woodard, Sergeant Maddox, and countless other veterans who were intentionally excluded from enjoying the benefits of the GI Bill. The VA Housing Loan Forever Act takes a meaningful step in the right direction. The VA Housing Loan Forever Act will allow an unused VA home loan benefit of an eligible deceased veterans to be transferred to their descendants, including a spouse or surviving spouse, a biological or legally adopted child, a grandchild, and any other distant descendant. This provision allowing direct descendants an opportunity to make use of the benefit is key. The federal government, after denying their deceased loved ones the opportunity to avail themselves of the home loan program, should not be in the business of picking which family member gets to participate, nor should the federal government create tension among families by making them choose. The transferability of the home loan benefit is similar to the transfer authority available for the educational system benefit for in the post 9/11 GI Bill. It's worth nothing that descendants who take advantage of this benefit are not exempt from paying fees associated with the VA home loan, likely making this expansion a revenue generator. Now, my colleagues, I know I've gone far beyond my time, and I apologize. And I thank Chairman Nakano and Ranking Member Bost for the opportunity to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn, and just consider that the whip's 5 minutes. I now invite our second panel to the witness table. Well, first of all, I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Clyburn be permitted to participate in questioning witnesses today. So welcome, so if there's no objection, so welcome, Mr. Clyburn. I welcome you. I invite you to our second panel at the witness table. I invite the second panel to the witness table. So the second panel will consist of Mr. John Bell III, Executive Director of the VA Home Loan Guarantee Service, Veterans Benefits Administration, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. So welcome and thank you for being here, and I will remind you to pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking and answering questions. So Mr. Bell, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and Representative Clyburn. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the VA Housing Loan Forever Act and the Department of Veteran Affairs VA Home Loan Program. VA has a responsibility to ensure all veterans have access to the benefits they have earned. VA acknowledges that throughout history, there have been unacceptable disparities in both VA benefit decisions and military discharge status due to racism, which has wrongly left black minority veterans without access to VA care and benefits. We are actively working to right those wrongs across the department, including the VA Home Loan Program. The VA Home Loan Program, first authorized through the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, or the GI Bill, helps veterans achieve the dream of home ownership and build intergenerational wealth. After World War II, this unique benefit helped our nation's housing market grow and led to an American prosperity that incorporated many, but not all, veterans into a booming middle class. Sadly, many American veterans that served during and after World War II were prevented from accessing that American dream due to the color of their skin. I am personally disheartened by the industry-wide racism veterans face throughout the home buying process, and I am here today to express my commitment to addressing home ownership gaps for minority veterans. While data shows that racial and ethnic homeownership gaps are smaller for veteran and active duty military households as compared to the total population, this only means that more work is needed. As Executive Director of the Home Loan Guarantee Service, I have strengthened VA's oversight and accountability of the appraisal process to ensure that Home Loan Program supports minority veterans using their benefit. As a member of the President's Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity, or PAVE, VA continues to collaborate with other federal housing agencies to address bias in the evaluation appraisal process through research, education, and policy. VA's own unique appraisal tools, Tidewater and reconsideration of value, are models for ensuring veterans have the opportunity to raise concerns during the home buying process and obtain fair, accurate, and objective valuation of their homes. Within the coming weeks, VA will also deploy technology that reviews all VA appraisal reports for racially biased terms. While current oversight efforts suggest racially motivated bias is rare within VA's fee panel, it is unacceptable to me that even one veteran might experience undervaluation of their home due to race or ethnicity. Turning to the VA Housing Loan Forever Act, this legislation is an opportunity for VA to further help correct these historic injustices by making certain descendants of veterans eligible for VA housing benefits. This bill will make a meaningful difference for both descendants of veterans that were denied access to their VA home loan, as well as to the VA Home Loan Benefit Program itself administered by VA. That is why VA supports the bill, subject to addressing technical and implementation concerns, as well as budgetary offsets and appropriations. As I testified before the committee almost 1 year ago today, veterans as a group still face barriers to using their earned home loan benefit due to misperceptions about our program. I long for the day when I don't have to worry about whether a veteran will face any difficulty using this invaluable benefit they have earned serving our great nation. Homeownership is essential in building wealth, and the VA Housing Loan Forever Act helps restore a long overdue opportunity for veterans and their descendants. In closing, I would like to reiterate VA's support for this bill and amendments, and subject to availability of offsets and appropriations. I welcome the opportunity to work with the committee to discuss technical concerns with the bill, as well as other legislative opportunities to remove barriers veterans face when buying a home. This concludes my testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bell. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Bell, I appreciate your testimony and VA's willingness to and eagerness to work with us to improve this bill, and I understand that implementing this legislation would require a heavy lift on behalf of VA, but you and your team seem ready to meet the challenge. One key concern that my staff has learned relates to the availability of records to confirm deceased veterans' eligibility and the past use of their home loan benefits. Can you describe how VA would approach this issue to ensure that descendants are able to access the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program with ease?
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And I will say that is, in our read of the bill, there's a vacuum with being able to access those records, because that opens the door for other issues. As we are going to have to manually understand how to address those concerns, as well as making sure that we're not making a burden on the descendant as well. There are issues that we need to address from a technical standpoint on how those would be resolved. We also do not want to upset our service to the veterans and the benefit that they have earned, as we are one of the only agencies that have subject matter experts that answer phones, and we're answering those phones in less than 1 minute. So our most experienced individuals are serving our veterans our lenders, servicers, appraisers, when they have questions about getting a veteran from beginning to end, as we increase the program, we need to understand how we're going to address those technical concerns.
Well, thank you. Mr. Bell, I'd like to turn to a discussion of discriminatory practices that may unfortunately still exist in the home buying process. There are many aspects of discrimination in the appraisal and valuation process that negatively affect black buyers in the market. How is VA addressing this issue?
So first and foremost, sir, thank you for that question. We are working with enforcement agencies to strengthen our guardrails against discrimination, and that is through the PAVE Task Force. We are also adding oversight to flag terminology that would indicate appraisal bias. We're going to have that technology deployed by the end of this month. So we're making strides in being able to understand just that, not only the appraiser, but also the appraisal itself, so that we can do deep dives on those appraisals pretty quickly, whether or not someone requests a reconsideration of value, or before that process in the Tidewater initiative, which is unique to the industry, which allows the appraiser to say, there may be a problem on value before I even start the appraisal, so please give me more information so that I can make sure that I am understanding the value that you're trying to hit.
Well, thank you. Do you have any suggestions for how Congress could add to the bill we are considering today to strengthen statutory protections to ensure that all buyers using a VA home loan guarantee are treated equitably?
I think that, and great question, thank you, sir. We are looking at the bill as an opportunity and trying to address some of these technical issues with the program that can be overcome. I think that they're overcome, though, by understanding that, again, we have to make sure as an agency that we are continuing to reduce those appraisal times that Ranking Member Boss brought up. We have reduced that time from 30 days a year ago when we started talking about this to 12 and a half days to now 7.5 days is our average response time from appraisal to from order to delivery. So as we continue to work on how, from a technology standpoint, from a recruitment standpoint of appraisers, from an understanding of what that appraisal is telling us from a bias standpoint. And then we still haven't, what the bill doesn't address are things like what we talked about in the hearing a year ago, and that's preventing veterans from being able to bid on homes because of misinformation or misperceptions of the program that were brought 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So we're working on all of those things. We're also, we have examples where we are removing appraisers for bad acts. We've done that this year. We've also started a tracking process where we're understanding when when discrimination in general occurs, so that we can understand not only where it happens, why it happens, who we've referred it to, or what ends up happening at the end of the day. So all those things are being.
Well, thank you. My time is up. I want to now yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the expansion that's being proposed here in the new bill is significant changes to the VA home loan program. Has the VA estimated how many people would be eligible in the new benefit, and what would it do to your current processing times for underwriting and guaranteed loans?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. We are still trying to understand from a technical standpoint just how many veterans descendants that we're talking about, especially as if you're looking at exploring multiple descendants and how those would be approved through the process. I think there are opportunities. There are ways that we can work and understand what those what those concerns are. One of the other concerns that we have is that we just in October are now in a positive subsidy, so the first time in a long time, meaning that the amount of fees that we are collecting aren't covering the cost of the program. This is the first year that we've entered that. Now, there's good news to that and bad news. The good news is because there are more veterans that are exempt from paying the funding fee than ever before, we are receiving less funding fees, but more loans, right? So the program has grown 650%, and now in 2010 we were at 28% that were funding fee exempt. Now we are at 53% that are funding fee exempt, and those are from some of the wonderful bills and legislative acts like Blue Water Navy, that we've seen over a short period of time.
So I understand that many of the records, and we've talked about this in this committee so many times, World War II and Korean War veterans, they were destroyed in St. Louis in 1973 in the fire, and the other other veterans' records, and they're stored on microfilm, and you have to go back and rebuild all that and everything, and some of them are available, some aren't. Would the VA know if veterans from World War II or Korea era used their home loan programs, and what would the VA do if there was no way to provide this information?
Thank you, sir. Another great question and another concern that we have with, from a technicality standpoint. The understanding before 1977 would be that is going to be a highly intensive manual process in understanding or doing the research for to understand eligibility. So there would have to be some type of technical amendment, again, working with the committee to understand how we get over that, because the last thing you also want to do is make it so overly burdensome on the descendant to have to prove, that it's not worth their time, or energy, or even they may not have the information as well. And how do you make those decisions? So those are things that we still need to work from a technical standpoint on, with the committee, but we look forward to doing that.
Do you have a guess of how many additional full-time employees would the VA need to employ this bill as we move forward that would not delay the process of veterans that are trying to get those loans right now?
Yes, sir, that's a great question, and thank you. I'm going to have to, again, because there are so many technical conversations that we still need to have from a costing standpoint, we still haven't fully understood that actual number from a VA perspective. So I would love to be able to give you that. I just can't provide it today.
So my bill, H.R. 7735, would improve VA's desktop appraisal process and ensure that veterans can quickly and get an appraisal and purchase a home. How would expanding the home loan benefit under this legislation affect the appraisal process that veterans have already seen long wait times for?
First of all, again, I would applaud and thank you for the help with that legislation. And what that does is it, again, helps us to allow the appraiser to use other tools to come up with value, meaning they do not have to go out to the property every time. They can use other means to determine the equity or the value in the home. Also from a VA perspective, it allows us from a technology standpoint to really monitor that situation and understand why those value shifts are happening and occurring, and what we can do from a training aspect or from an enforcement aspect if wrong decisions are made. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, and I'm out of time. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. Chairwoman Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Getting used to these microphones are powerful. So thank you, Mr. Bell, for being here. And, you stated in your testimony, you're stating it now in terms of answering questions, that you are supportive of the legislation. You're also saying there are some technical edits and changes. I'm just trying to get a gauge from your perspective. Do you fully support the bill, want to get it executed? I know sometimes people come from the VA and they say they support the bill, but when we get down to the brass knuckles, they're not in a place to fully support the bill. So I'm just trying to kind of get a gauge.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for the question. And I'm going to get a little personal here. People that know me well know I came to this program from the private sector. I did that because I'm a veteran. I've used this program 5 different times over my life. And honestly, if this program wasn't here, I wouldn't have been able to own a home. I owe this program, a lot, and I find it. I have a big passion. I also have a passion for housing, and I also have this conversation. If we leave one veteran behind because they can't access the benefit, then I have to do everything I can to make sure that I'm not doing that. So highlighting what the issues are, addressing those issues, trying to determine and find an equitable solution that we can move forward, that's what I'm here for. So hopefully you take that as, from a passionate plea from me, is that I'm committed to do what I need to do so that I'm not leaving veterans behind.
Very good. Then in your answer to me, the way I am interpreting it is that you believe in the program, I believe in the program. It's a wonderful program for veterans. But I want you to weigh in a little bit more on the descendants part. We're trying to really right a historical wrong here, and to the degree that you support and you believe the VA is capable of moving forward with the bill when it becomes a bill.
So from an overall support, again, I would have to have more information and work out some technical specificities in the bill to say VA fully supports, because there's still some things from a technical standpoint, from a budgetary standpoint, that we have to work out so that we know what we're agreeing to. But it all starts with, from my point of view, it all starts with the commitment to work those things out, to have those conversations, to understand exactly what are the things we can do and what are the obstacles that we have to overcome. And that's what I'm committed to do.
Very good. I mean, it sounds as though you're working hard. As you said, you're doing things to right the wrongs. And I understand that to be in the current process, when minority, African Americans, Latinos come and looking for a loan, that appraisers or whatever are not going to discriminate. And I hear that and appreciate that. It's just, I want to hear you say that you believe that by really righting a historical wrong, that this is the right direction to go in.
So thank you for your question. In righting a historical wrong, there are, this is certainly one avenue that we have to explore. We owe it to our veterans to explore this. Whether or not there are things that are still to be worked out on the current right now for all veterans that still need to be explored in the home buying and opportunities for home buying, I think the answer is yes on that as well. So I think this goes solves one aspect from if we can get the technical things worked out, budgetary, all those type of things. But I think more work is to be done.
Very good. And you do understand that the African American families lost out on generational wealth. at this point, there is no way to really recover generational wealth, and part of generational wealth is home buying and owning that home and being able to pass that along to the next generation within your family. So I appreciate your efforts, and I hope very much that we can all work together on what I believe to be a very, very important bill for our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bell, thank you for your service and for continuing to serve by working for the VA. I have also used this program to buy my first home, and I feel similarly about it to the way that you do. And I couldn't help but think, I have 2 kids. I don't know if you have any, but you're nodding your head yes. Okay. I just think if a child grows up knowing that the roof over their head is in part due to the military service of their father or their mother, their grandfather, their grandmother, whoever it was, that kid is going to be more likely to serve themselves one day. Do you agree with me on that?
Yes, sir.
And we actually, one of the things we grapple with here in Congress is that there's an increasingly small number of Americans who are even eligible to serve in the first place because of physical and mental health and other reasons. And in the Marine Corps where I served, we haven't made the progress that we want to make as far as achieving better racial diversity, especially in the officer ranks, especially in the senior officer ranks. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps will be the first person to tell you that. I mean, it's not a secret. So wouldn't you also agree that if we were able to pass this bill and make these family members eligible to use the benefits that their relatives earned? I mean, not that they were given, but they themselves earned with their service. Don't you think that would help us appeal to the next generation of people that we want to wear the uniform in the United States?
Yes, sir. And in my testimony and certainly answering the questions, I hope that you get that, it's certainly that we are supportive overall of the bill. It's the technical questions that we need to work through so that we understand those same veterans that are utilizing the program now and utilizing their benefits, that they aren't harmed along the process as well by increased wait times, by so many appraisers. There are only so many appraisers out there, and we have to make sure that we've done a lot of work in reducing that appraisal time, and we've got to keep those appraisal times low so that they are that they are borrowers that that sellers want to sell to. It's a balancing act, and that we fully support that there are things that we need to do from a home buying process to make it better for veterans. From this bill, we certainly support overall, but we support with the technical amendments that we have to work through and those budgetary and appropriation standpoint issues, because we certainly don't want to burden the benefit as a whole. And then we talked about the positive subsidy and how that works as well as a concern.
No, those are valid points to raise, but I just think, no good deed goes unpunished, and the VA has expanded and risen to meet challenges. I mean, just yesterday we were in this hearing room talking about how the VHA hired 85,000 people at the start of the pandemic with the resources that we gave them just to meet the challenge that the pandemic presented. And we can do that on the benefits side. It is definitely possible to execute this. I mean, there's more data and historical material today than at any time in human history. So the question is just if we're committed to it and want to provide the right resources. It starts with us, obviously, but we want to make sure that we're finding a willing counterpart in your agency. So,
yes, sir. And if I'll just give you one data point for that, one of the biggest things to look to is that what we know is non-military households, that percentage of generational wealth, that gap is 22%. If you served, that gap goes all the way down to 13%. And if you're active duty, it's 7%. Just think what you do to the program and what you do to that recruitment, by taking this next step. So we're certainly supportive and working to resolve, and we think we owe it to our veterans and our veteran community moving forward.
Great. Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Mr. Gallego.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. And I am very proud that I've used actually all the houses I've bought have all been VA home loans, and even my refis. And this is why I think it's such a great opportunity. And it's, it's sad that because of discrimination, African American families, as well as Latino families and other families, miss really the generational wealth that comes from this. And I think this is a great opportunity to really bring at least some justice back to those families. Expansion of this obviously will be difficult, but not impossible. We've had this type of expansion in the past. One idea that I'm just kind of curious about, if let's say you're a current homeowner and we pass this law, will a current homeowner be able to refi into a VA home loan?
Will a current homeowner
that becomes eligible under this law?
Homeowner that they would have the full entitlement.
Full entitlement.
Just like all veterans have today.
Okay. And the verification process right now, from what I recall, from my first home loan, I had to go and get it from a verification letter from the VA Resource Center that was near my home. But after that, once I got my first home loan, it was easy just to go find it. So, when we're thinking about implementing this, will we be thinking about having some of the recipients going through the same process, going to a VA Resource Center, or do we want to expand this somehow to allow the private sector to go and find these people? Because this is a great market now that you're going to be able to tap to actually encourage people to use this benefit.
Yes, sir, and great question. Thank you very much. I would say that you don't have to go very far back to know 12 years ago, it took 30 days for us to issue eligibility. That was one of the biggest issues that veterans were facing when utilizing the program. That number is now 76% are instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
That you would never know that VA's in the background,
right.
Looking at those and making those eligibility determinations because it's instant. If you add 1 to 2 business days to that number goes up to 96%. So if we can do that, right, then there's certainly things that we can do to address this. It's just that we need to know all the particulars and work out the particulars to take those next steps. And those are the things that we're willing to work with the committee on to continue to address.
One of the things that happens when the market is hot, people actually don't like selling to veterans. And they'll come up with a lot of excuses why. Largely it's because they don't want to work through the cumbersome process. We can't pay above appraisal value, which I think makes sense because we have to back it as the government. And then also we have seen historically when African Americans go to refinance their house that their homes are undervalued compared to white homes. So one of the things that we need to do while we're implementing this is to make sure that we have some protections so our African American friends don't fall into the same trap that they're already falling through the regular conventional mortgage market. So yeah, they'll be able to buy homes, but they're still not going to get the same equal value that we see, our white veterans getting. So I think we need to make sure we put some guardrails in there so that the benefit is actually real and it's 100% as equal as possible between it. Because I've gotten rejected when I was trying to buy some homes. I've been using the VA home loan since I left, so that was 20-something years ago. I've been rejected a couple times, and I don't think it's because I'm Latino, but because I'm a veteran and they just didn't want to go through it. Now, you just give, some people an extra excuse to deny a black person the chance to buy a home, they will take it. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of what's out there. So I want to make sure we add some extra protections to make sure that they're not discriminated against. That's the only advice I would give on that. I yield back. I yield back. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Ms. Kapler, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for what I consider to be an exciting hearing. I worked in this field of housing for many years before being elected to Congress, and actually was serving President Jimmy Carter when we passed the Community Reinvestment Act by one vote. I will never forget that important day, which recognized the lack of fair credit across this country. And I entered Congress many years ago before the VA had much of a focus at all on housing. Certainly, multifamily housing for vets like we have, dealing with the homeless now, and I've seen the VA mature in terms of its housing options over the years. So I see exciting potential here, and I'm so happy, Mr. Chairman, that you are doing this hearing. Thank you so very much, and thank you to Ranking Member Bost as well. My two questions are, number one, in the way this program is being shaped initially, and I totally respect Assistant Leader Clyburn's testimony today, have you thought about working cross-agency with HUD? And I'll explain that in a second. That's the first question. And number two, do you have the ability to map your VA-held properties that have been in a real estate inventory unoccupied in areas that have been traditionally redlined across our country? The problem is not just the VA. The problem is historic redlining. The problem is the lack of fair credit, despite all the acts that we've passed, and the lack of fair credit institutions inside of many neighborhoods and communities in our country, and also the lack of job training in the building skills in many of these communities. And so as I look at the VA, I keep thinking, wow, we have veterans who are talented, in terms of workforce development, where we could be actually training individuals to repair and build housing, to make improvements. We could, through the VA and HUD, identify neighborhoods that need infill housing or improvements, and we would be able to also offer additional mortgages as a result of this program to areas that have been traditionally redlined. So whether it's this bill or some attendant bills, I'm just thinking this is a sector that truly has unmet potential across our country. And so my first question really is, do you have the ability to go into your VA-held properties that are unoccupied and identify where those are, and if they are in areas that were traditionally redlined, and how can we work with the administration and with HUD to develop community plans for infill housing, repair, and ownership in those places, as well as, and what Mr. Bost said, if the records are burned, this is even more reason to identify neighborhoods that were left behind and in the national interest. Rebuild those neighborhoods and provide the kinds of housing amenities and improvements that are needed. So do you hold such an inventory? And number two, do you have the ability to work cross-agency so this can be part of the Building Back Better America that all of us would like to see? Oh, I can't hear.
I apologize. Thank you, ma'am, for those questions. And I'm thinking that you're talking about our real estate owned portfolio when in the first question. And what I will say about that is we've actually collaboratively worked with other agencies. We helped USDA a few years back with their real estate owned portfolio. And we continue to work with HUD from a PAVE standpoint on addressing appraisal bias, shared databases, where we're going to share data back and forth on the information of the properties that we have and the properties that they have, so that we can understand and have a better understanding across the board from an enforcement standpoint. Granted, FHA, the enforcement capabilities are not exactly apple to apple with VA as FHA, but certainly we have the capability to work back and forth, and we do collaboratively meet with HUD bi-weekly pretty much, and sometimes weekly, and have for years, and discussing those things. That inventory, though, is so low right now because of a few factors. One is COVID, and where we had forbearances and we stopped foreclosures, but we also have been able to sell that portfolio, to veterans and to non-veterans. And to give you an example of that, let's say 3 years ago, that portfolio might have been at 10,000, 10, 11,000. That portfolio is down to less than 2,000 at this point, houses across the nation. So there are very few of those. And another piece of that, of course, is always our foreclosure inventory or the amount of foreclosures, because we're able to save a lot of our veterans and cure a lot of those loans through servicing efforts, working with servicers. So we've been able to keep that number very low, but we certainly have that capability, and then we also have the capability from a data standpoint in our roadmap. So we've shared our 5-year technical roadmap, and in that 5-year plan, we're in year 2 of that, coming into year 2 of that. In that 5-year plan is the integration of all of our appraisal work into the normal work of workflow and data analytics. Some very we'll have a lot of data to be able to share in the next coming year, in the next few years.
So right now, you couldn't give me data on Ohio.
I could give you data. It would depend on the data that you needed. So I have data on our inventory. It would just depend on how what data that you actually needed. Like, I can go down to subdivision. I can go down
Census tract.
and by census tract. But we're also working on even further technology to go down to the home level and be able to give you property address from that level and look at those houses, because of we're doing other work in disaster recovery and when disaster hits, being more proactive to understand how what veterans need from us before the disaster occurs and then after the disaster occurs. So we're doing a whole lot of work in looking at those individual homes and how we gain access to that information. So I do have a lot of information on properties.
I'll end because I know I'm over time, but Mr. Chairman, I would love to see any of that data for Ohio, and so I can see where these homes in the inventory are located, both for VA and for HUD, because HUD holds potential to also house veterans or be involved in a workforce development program that veterans run for veterans and their families, and to train up people who could gain skills then in neighborhoods where reinvestment could occur with some additional push. So that's kind of the framework, and would look forward to working further with you, Mr. Bell, and my time has expired. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Capter, and we'll see if we can get the staff to get the data, and we can get some from maybe Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, that will conclude the second panel, and you're excused. I would now like to I want to thank you for participating. I'll now invite our third panel to the witness table. I'll now introduce our third panel witnesses. We have with us Mr. Richard Brookshire, who is co-founder of the Black Veterans Project, and it looks like he's joining us online. We have Matria Spotzer, Center for Responsible Lending. She joined us online, or is it? She'll be online. So I understand that Ms. Spotzer will be joining us online momentarily. We have Mr. Joseph Sharp, Director of Veterans Employment and Education of the American Legion. We'll begin with testimony from Mr. Brookshire, but be sure to pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking. I recognize you, Mr. Brookshire, for your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bose, and members of the committee. On behalf of the Black Veterans Project, thank you for the opportunity to share our views on the draft of the Housing Loan Forever Act. It's been 78 years since the initial crafting of the GI Bill. It is my hope that today our government might begin the steps necessary to address a gaping economic chasm left to fester for Black military families who sent their best and brightest, strongest and most able to fight in America's wars, but face obstruction from accessing the myriad of veterans' benefits they'd earned upon returning home. At the outset of the GI Bill, when signed into law in 1944, our government condoned racial covenants, redlining, racially discriminatory practices in collegiate admissions, and broader divestment from Black communities tantamount to economic lynching. Black America responded with a famed Double Victory campaign to champion military success against fascism overseas and catalyze equality for Black Americans at home. That campaign would be a failure, as our government decided against abiding by this call to action and became derelict in its duty to serve and protect returning Black GIs, the vast majority of whom face barriers to the utilization of their housing and education benefits under a ubiquitous national network of Jim Crow policies bent on locking them out of what would come to be the most significant social welfare program ever designed by our government. The impact has been vast, devastating, and intergenerational. It is exemplified today amongst descendants of Black World War II veterans forced to contend with the median racial wealth gap of $164,000 compared to white families. A 2021 Brandeis University study found that descendants of a Black World War II veteran obstructed from accessing the GI Bill were owed approximately $180,000, the amount of GI benefits a white military family received between 1945 and 1956. As our nation made historical strides in civil rights into the 1950s and 60s, Black military families would continue to send their sons and daughters off to foreign wars, only to face new and ingenious mechanisms of obstruction to veterans' benefits that would compound the harms already suffered, add insult to injury, and cement economic inequality for generations to come. Conley Monk, the son of a World War II veteran who never accessed the GI Bill, is a former Marine and Vietnam War veteran himself, who recently filed a landmark lawsuit led by Yale Law School in Monk versus the United States, alleging decades of gross negligence by the Department of Veteran Affairs in confronting how racial discrimination affected the allocation of veterans' benefits. Mr. Monk was denied a VA home loan for over 40 years. The Monk family story is important for two reasons. One, both Conley and his father never gained access to the GI Bill despite honorable military service. And two, decades of hardship Conley endured resulted in him discouraging his own children from serving in our nation's military. They now serve nobly as law enforcement officers in their respective communities at a time when the Department of Defense faces major shortfalls in recruiting its all-volunteer force. The Monk family has earned the VA home loan benefit twice and deserves to pass it down to descendants as a form of repair. At the outset of the 117th Congress, the introduction of the Sergeant Isaac Woodard Jr. and Sergeant Joseph H. Maddox GI Bill Restoration Act became a beacon of hope and possibility. The draft legislation being discussed today is specific to the VA home loan and has taken several shapes to ensure redress is both targeted and facially neutral, not an easy task. The Housing Loan Forever Act must target multiple descendants of World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War era veterans without parameters that would preclude large swaths of direct descendants from accessing the VA home loan. Shortened timeframes for utilization that fall below 10 years should also be avoided. I want to dispel any notion that this policy would be a handout. The VA home loan benefit was earned and justly denied to Black military veterans and their families. This policy has the potential to be revenue generating as well. The first two GI bills yielded a federal return of $60 billion in tax revenue for the $21 billion invested. Racial obstruction of the VA home loan undercut federal returns by untold billions, and we can rectify that history. Homeownership has been foundational to the American dream. The GI Bill helped to realize homeownership for millions, but not for all who earned it. And it's time to fix that by enabling the transfer of an unused VA home loan benefit to direct descendants under the Housing Loan Forever Act. 8 decades After 8 decades, our country must recognize the injustice levied on Black veterans and do something substantive to redress it. Thank you for allowing me to provide this testimony, and I look forward to working with you as we move this legislation forward in the 118th Congress.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brookshire. Without objection, your written testimony will be, in full, will be included in the hearing record. Ms. Spotzer, you are recognized for 5 minutes to present your testimony. Ms. Spotzer on. There she is, there.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Boss. I apologize for not being there in person. It was my full intention, but unfortunately I wasn't feeling well. And my kids weren't feeling well, and so we weren't able to make it to Washington, D.C. One of the most important things that I wanted to say to you in this hearing, as I've had an opportunity to listen to all of the voices, is that there is a single consensus. And that consensus point is this, that when it comes to the work of this Committee on Veterans Affairs, there is a singular commitment to ensuring a principal point, and that is that no American veteran should ever be left behind. Any veteran that was entitled to a benefit as a result of their service, their commitment, their dedication in the defense of this nation should be honored. And that's what makes me so excited about this proposal. It is the possibility that we have a mechanism for honoring that. And I believe that that's a very important policy tool. So I'm not going to waste my time in very important ways. I'm not a huge fan of reading written testimony in long ways before hearings. I'm more a fan of actually pointing out some key points. The first of which is I'll talk to you a little bit about the Center for Responsible Lending, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses on research and policy that is dedicated to promoting home ownership and family wealth by working to eliminate abusive family financial practices. CRL is an affiliate of Self-Help Organization, which is a community development financial institution that in the past has helped many families by providing over $7 billion in financing to traditionally underserved communities. But having said that, I wanted to point out to you that CRL's interest in this particular policy proposal is the fact that it helps to answer a core question. And that core question is this. We understand that there were millions of service members in the past who did not have the opportunity to receive their VA home loan benefit. And knowing what we know about generational wealth and about home ownership and the role that it plays in that, is there a mechanism by which we can do that? And I applaud you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and Congressmember Clyburn for advancing a policy tool that I think has a powerful mechanism for doing that, which is to transfer those unused benefits to veterans' descendants. In order to do that, as we've talked about the various discussions in this hearing, there are a couple of things that come up. Number one is whether or not we have a compelling reason to do so. And I believe that the testimony of my predecessors actually acknowledges that. The impact of racial discrimination has been significant and plays a large role. It's not only racial discrimination, but it's also the history of financial institutions disinvesting in traditionally rural communities, which disproportionately affected white veterans. That has also led to that. But now that we know that we have a compelling reason to do that, and now that we know that there were promises that we did not keep to our service members, the question becomes, how can we fulfill that promise? And I would put forward to you that this bill provides a vehicle to do that. But in order to do it effectively, we'll have to do it on a much narrower scope. And so in the last minute of my testimony, I'll suggest a couple of things. Number one, I think it will be really important that we narrow the timeline of veterans that are eligible between 1944, the passage of the GI Bill, to 1977. In doing so, I think we can greater concentrate the scope of veterans who are actually eligible to the benefit to those who actually actively may have been likely to have had racial discrimination or bias in investing in rural communities as a contributing factor to their inability to access the VA home loan benefit. If that is the case, then we come up with a pool of veterans that are about 2 million. As opposed to that, we would come up with a pool of veterans that was anywhere from 16 to 18 million, and the descendant pool would be significantly larger. So I'd love to talk to you about the proposals that CRL has raised, because I think that this is a powerful tool that we could use that could accomplish our objectives on a facially neutral policy basis, and at the same time generate revenue for the Department of Veterans Affairs in a way that could actually help strengthen the VA funding fee program. So thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we're hopeful to continue to participate in the discussion.
Well, thank you, Ms. Spotzer, for your testimony. Your written testimony in full will be included in the hearing record. I now recognize Mr. Sharp. You recognize for your testimony for 5 minutes. Mr. Sharp.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, and distinguished members of the House Committee on Veteran Affairs, on behalf of our National Commander, Vincent J. Triola, and our 1.6 million members, we thank you for the opportunity to discuss draft legislation concerning the Department of Veteran Affairs Home Loan Guarantee Program. The history of the Home Loan Guarantee Program can be traced directly to the American Legion's advocacy when past National Commander Harry W. Comeri handwrote the initial draft of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, commonly known as the GI Bill, from his suite at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. Since then, the GI Bill has become known as one of the most important pieces of legislation of the 20th century, ushering in an unparalleled period of American prosperity led by home ownership. The VA Loan Guarantee Program was predicated on the concept that Americans conscripted into service to their country through no fault of their own had missed the opportunity to establish purchasing power and credit through civilian employment. By providing government guarantees of payments to lenders, the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program would make returning from World War II competitive in the housing market with their civilian counterparts. In short order, it became apparent that the program would lead to a transformational changes across the country. By 1955, 4.3 million veterans had purchased homes worth $33 billion, accounting for 20% of all new homes built. Despite its outsized impact on the housing market, the full story of the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program cannot be told without recognizing the veterans that it left behind. From the inception of the Service Members Readjustment Act of 1944, Black veterans had challenges utilizing every component of their GI Bill benefit due to discriminatory practices in certain regions of the country. The VA Home Loan Guarantee Program today is a powerful tool for narrowing the home ownership gap for Black veterans, with Black veterans having consistently higher home ownership rates than Black non-veterans. However, the question for us today is whether descendants should enjoy the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program earned by their loved ones who served in the U.S. military in the past, while recognizing the injustices committed to numerous Black veterans who did not receive the VA benefit due during World War II era. We currently do not have a position on the question of transferability to descendants, but welcome continued discussion surrounding the approach to benefit transferability. Concurrent with this question, separate discussions on expanding the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program to immediate dependents is warranted. The post-9/11 GI Bill transferability component serves as the principal example for this potential expansion. While the enactment of this provision was designed in part to supplement Department of Defense's retention incentives in 2008, the American Legion articulated its support clearly based on family needs. And Finally, the American Legion currently supports that a service member or veteran should have the authority to transfer their VA Home Loan Guarantee benefit to dependents. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, and distinguished members of the committee, the American Legion thanks you for your leadership and for allowing us the opportunity to explain our position of our 1.6 million members on this importance of this legislation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp, for your testimony. Your written testimony in full will be included in the hearing record. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning of the third panel. My question is for Mr. Brookshire. In your testimony, you mentioned that Black Veterans Project advises against parameters in this legislation that would preclude large swaths of descendants from accessing the VA Home Loan Guarantee benefit. Can you please discuss this recommendation and how we can improve this legislation to better address discriminatory practices in the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program?
Sure. Thank you for your question, and thank you for having me. I reviewed, I think, several different drafts up to this point. The first one that I'd received had that only one descendant would be able to receive that benefit. It also, the language that I had read wasn't specific to eras of service. And so just kind of connecting the dots there, it was very clear that it'd be diminutive numbers of descendants of specifically Black World War II veterans would actually access the benefit at that rate, just given all of and there was a 5-year limit, I believe, in the first draft. And so for me, looking at that, the first advent of the VI bill from 1945 to 1956, giving descendants the same amount of time, I think is just, or 10 years or so. And something lower than that, I fear that, it would take too long for descendants to either find out that this existed and then overcome the hurdles to actually to get it used if it was under 10 years. And I really just think about the historical harms, like talking about tens of billions of dollars siphoned out of the Black community because of this obstruction, and it's really still being felt by the families today. And so direct descendants, I think, should have the ability to access that, and I'm very much looking forward to continued conversation about how we actually achieve that. But for me, it was about maximizing the repair and not wanting to implement a policy that would in any way preclude, particular direct descendants from potentially being able to access it, this benefit.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brookshire. Mr. Sharp, I appreciated your detailed testimony regarding the forward-looking expansion of eligibility for the VA Home Loan Guarantee benefit to dependents. Our hope is to make this transfer as seamless as that for the VA Educational Assistance benefits. Do you have any suggestions for how VA can implement the transfer process to ensure that when a veteran decides to pass their home loan benefit to a descendant, that it is done so efficiently?
Well, we know that in the past that the VA has done an excellent job with the GI Bill. We expect that they'll do the same thing for the home loan program as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Spotzer, it's my understanding that the idea to make this policy proposal facially neutral was yours, and I appreciate your dedication to working on this legislation with my staff. Well, I'm absolutely committed to righting the wrong that was discrimination against Black veterans and accessing their GI Bill benefits. I understand that there are other demographics of veterans who also had unequal access to their benefits. Can you please describe the other populations of veteran descendants that may benefit from this bill, like Latino, Asian, or other non-white veterans, and how this bill widely addresses discriminatory practices in the housing and mortgage lending market?
Yes, Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. This proposal, as it's currently drafted, is facially neutral, and it means that all veterans that did not receive or did not utilize their benefit would be able to transfer it to a descendant. The reason why that's powerful, and it would be especially more powerful if it was time and trans between 1944 to 1977, which is a core component of the proposal that we put forth. is because there are nearly 2 million veterans of color in the United States that did not utilize their benefits during the period when the United States supported racially discriminatory housing policies. The way that number works out is that there are about 600 to 90,000 African American veterans, and also on a facially neutral basis, 600 and some odd thousand white veterans, and the remainder of the numbers for Asian American and Hispanic American veterans and Native veterans that did not have the opportunity to actualize their benefit. The point of adopting a facially neutral policy is, number one, it recognizes the goal of military service going forward, which is that when we say we leave no service member behind, we are saying that we believe that service is consistent with adopting a facially neutral policy. But we would also recognize that there has been a disproportionate impact on veterans of color. And so the facially neutral policy is the way to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Spotzer. Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sharp, are you concerned about how expanding the home loan program as proposed in this bill would impact current veterans and their home loan programs and overloading the system?
Well, with this particular bill, it's currently in a discussion phase with the American Legion. We currently don't have a position on that.
And we want to make sure we don't actually do any harm to existing veterans, and I'm sure that's the Legion's position. Does the American Legion have any concerns that the VA would be able to handle that increased number? I know it's not, we're just talking about it, okay? And you know, the VA itself, while in the last testimony said that they'll work with us, and we're wanting to work on that, but we want to make sure that the VA, the American Legion, and our other VSOs also understand that we want to make sure that no existing benefits are lost, are hampered by this.
Well, currently, this particular draft bill has not been vetted with our membership.
Okay.
So again, I can't
understand.
speak on it.
Okay. So also then, Mr. Brookshire, how does the Black Veteran Project envision VA successfully expanding this benefit to the descendants listed in the bill?
Mr. Brookshire, your mic is, you need to unmute, Mr. Brookshire.
I apologize. You're asking me how do I envision the bill's implementation?
Yes. How do you envision expanding this benefit to the descendants with our records the way they are? And maybe you didn't hear my conversation in the opening.
I'll kick that to somebody else. I'm here representing the history and the historical record in the Black veterans community in support of redress. Thank you.
Ms. Spotzer has her hand.
Ms. Spotzer, would you like to answer that?
So yes, and thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I think that there's a way that we can accomplish this in a way that is more manageable. We have, based on the estimates, anywhere between 16 to 18 million veterans that currently exist in the United States. Obviously, if we were applying a descendant transfer benefit, the pool of descendants and legatees would be exceptionally large. One of the things that we propose is to actually tie the transfer of the benefit to the retroactive period when the United States actually engaged in the discriminatory housing policies. And as a result of this, Ranking Member Bost, I think we actually are able to better confine the scope of legatees that are eligible. And as a part of that, we would apply 2 additional layers that I think are really important to talk about. One, we would limit the transfer of the benefit to first-time home buyers and first-generation home buyers. And if you did that based on CRL's analysis, which is included in my testimony, you would come up with a pool of about 1.5 million borrowers over the course of 10 years. Given that the record year that VA had in home lending last year was actually 1.4 million, that's a far more manageable scope in terms of the expansion of the pool over a 10-year period. than I think the broader proposal. And so we think that there is a way to actually keep our promise to the veterans that have served in the past, and yet make it actually manageable for the Department of Veterans Affairs and the United States government as it goes forward in keeping that promise.
So do you know or have a proposal on how we would, we really do, and in my opening testimony, I said this, we have got a real problem with trying to find our records from World War II and Korea and all of that because of the fire in St. Louis. Do you suggest other records on how we would build that back to find out, had they accessed, what exactly we could do to help that?
Well, I don't want to get into all of the technical details, but I will say that there is a distinction between the fire that damaged service members' actual service records and the records and documentation that related to whether or not the Veterans Administration Home Loan benefit was actually received. And so I think that there is a distinction, and we may have less record-keeping challenges related to the VA home loan benefit as it relates to actual service. So I would, and again, I mean, I think these are technical details that we can work out. But I think that one thing that I really received, and congratulate you in your testimony, Chairman, Ranking Member Boss, is that we're all committed to making sure that every veteran who served receives the benefits that they deserve. And this is just a proposal to make them be able to do that.
I appreciate that and look forward to having your input as we move forward and keep this discussion going. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Boss. I just have a couple more questions. Mr. Brookshire, following up on your response to Ranking Member, not Mr. Brookshire, Ms. Spotzer, how do you envision families selecting the one descendant to benefit from the transferred benefit?
Well, sir, one of the things that I liked about your proposal is that it doesn't ask that question. And so I want to congratulate you on that because I think it's harder. And I think the impact of generational wealth and the legacy of veterans not having the ability to pass that is a harder question, which is why I applaud your staff and your team and your proposal for not asking them to make that decision. My proposal is that if we apply the first generation and first time home buyer layers, we manage it down to a number that equates over 10 years to be about 1.5 million. So we are already in a manageable level that would not have to force us to ask the questions about which veteran or which descendant would necessarily benefit. And I'm doing that because I'm mindful to the questions that Assistant Secretary Bell raised about implementation and cost. Our goal in this proposal was to ensure that it was actually revenue generating for the federal government, and that by expanding the pool of borrowers who in fact would not be exempt, that we could help achieve a negative subsidy rate for the veterans funding fee.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Brookshire, I understand that much of your work and research relates to discrimination and inequities in character of discharge determinations. Do you have suggestions for how we can approach these bad paper discharges in this legislation to ensure that every descendant of a veteran who was wrongly denied benefits can now access those benefits?
Thank you for the question. I think that Connolly's a great example. He had a dishonorable discharge and had to fight for many years to try to get that upgraded. I think there can be, mechanisms put in place that account for dishonorable discharges during that period as well, starting with blue paper all the way through Vietnam with bad paper discharges to ensure that their descendants as well could potentially have access. The technicalities about how we do that, I think, still need to be discussed, but I definitely think that should be the case.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Brookshire, and thank you to all of our third panel guests. I want to thank all of our witnesses for appearing today, and I recognize Ranking Member Boss for any closing remarks they may have.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and once again, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I appreciate the discussion we've had on this draft proposal. And before I yield back, I want to acknowledge that this is probably the committee's last hearing of this Congress, and I want to thank all the members and their staff and for all the hard work and oversight and priorities and the legislation that we move forward. I also want to thank my friend Mark and colleague Mark Takano for his work as chairman over the last 2 years. Although we didn't always agree on every issue, I know he truly cares about doing what's best for Americans' veterans, as do I, and I look forward to continuing to work together next Congress to move forward with the things that the veterans need.
Well,
I yield back.
thank you, Ranking Member Bost, and I do want to say that the panel is excused, so you don't have to hang around. I again want to thank Representative Clyburn earlier for championing this important legislation, and thanks to our witnesses today. And as mentioned in my opening statement, this is a complex issue, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of our members and witnesses and what they brought to the conversation. My hope is to continue working together on this bill to ensure that we address unjust past discrimination in the VA home loan program. And I look forward to strengthening this benefit for veteran families so they can prosper into the future. It's never too late to do the right thing, and I'm confident that we can work to perfect this legislation and pursue that goal. And I, too, want to thank my colleague, the ranking member, for an amazing session of Congress. It was highly productive. We did some historic things. We did not agree on everything. That's that's about right. I mean, it's not an overstatement or an understatement. There were many things we did agree on, big things that we agreed on. I remind the ranking member that next year is the 100th anniversary of the Battle Monuments Commission.
Correct.
I see your staff is all like they're looking forward to that, as my staff.
Okay.
I stand ready to assist you in how we celebrate that full year. Yes, and I think your wife should see some things too. And I look forward to the work we're going to do in the next Congress. And it's a joyous thing to see our democracy at play and at work, that we trade places and how we do things and who has the gavel. So all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. And again, I thank you for appearing before us today. This hearing is now adjourned.